What you're looking at is the excellent Para Ordnance GI-45. I recommended it in 2011 and I still recommend it today. This thing's awesome. You can see I did a spray paint camo job and used it quite a bit, so the camo is kind of wearing off a little bit, but it's still pretty awesome. We're actually not here to talk about this specifically today. What I wanted to talk to you guys about, I want to change gears a little bit and actually talk about this Airsoft pistol. Now I know you guys are thinking to yourself, man, why would he review an Airsoft pistol? Hang tight, believe me. Good reasons to do that. But this is the KWC Colt licensed 1911 full metal, and it's actually a pretty decent setup. The reason for me reviewing an Airsoft pistol, why I own such an Airsoft pistol, and why you should own such an Airsoft pistol is, to use a borrowed term, the philosophy of use would be actually as a training aid. So you can do some pretty realistic training with this without having to spend ungodly amounts of money on your 45 ACP because it is expensive. So as I said, this is the KWC, and what I like about this CO2 pistol design is that it's very accurate to the real thing. So if we compare them side by side, you'll notice this one has some bells and whistles, skeletonized hammer, fancy trigger, stuff like that, but the basics, pretty similar. So we can take a look at the safeties where we'll start, and it works just like the real safety. So you've got safe and fire. So like on your Ruger 2245s, it's kind of like this button thing that you move, and it's in the same place, but it's not really the same. That way it's the same. Now one thing on this particular one, I can't say that it is indicative of the type, but when you have the safety on, if you pull the trigger hard, nothing happens, but then you go to disengage the safety and the hammer fires. So that's not super great, but for training purposes it works. The other thing is that with the hammer down, the safety will engage. Bit of a training issue, just don't get in the habit of turning that on when you shouldn't and you'll be fine. The hammer on this particular model is like your standard old school A1, because this is supposed to be a 1911 A1, and it's a pretty decent replica thereof. Oops. So you've got that big spur type hammer. The trigger is just kind of a standard trigger. There's really nothing to say about it, but it does have some knurling on the front, so that's kind of cool. It is a decently light trigger pull, but there is just a bit of creep. There's a lot of take up in this particular one, and you've got quite a bit of creep before it actually lets go. And I looked into doing a trigger job on it, but the components inside are actually surprisingly similar to the real deal, the actual 1911 that is, but they're made of such soft components I wouldn't want to do a trigger job on it and have it, be ruined. The grip safety on this is your standard A1 grip safety. It's actually a little bit thicker than the one on my actual 1911, which I, believe it or not, prefer. I know in my review in 2011 I raved about this grip safety, and I still love this really small non-beaver tail extension on the top and stuff like that. But having used the thicker grip safety, I do like that because it's a little bit easier to get a positive engagement on it, but not a big deal. So the grips on this, I believe that it will take actual 1911 grips. I haven't taken them off to confirm just because these are kind of goofy little polymer grips. Pretty chintzy, as a matter of fact. Well, not chintzy per se, but they're not super awesome quality. But I haven't had any need to replace them unless I want to go putting Punisher grips on there. 1911's got to have Punisher grips, right? No. So the sights on this are fairly standard, like combat sights. Get an idea of the sight picture there. I'm going to kind of gangster style it so you can actually get a sight picture. And that front sight is really pretty thin. But so is your notch in the back, so you don't have a whole lot of air on either side, which for me makes it a little bit difficult, because on my actual one, you get a lot more air. So I'm just used to shooting with more air, but that would be super easy to do. You take a little file and you just kind of nix either side just a hair, and then boom, you know, you've got your sight picture that you're looking for. Now the magazine release on this works just like the real deal. It's in the right spot. And speaking of the magazine release, let's talk about the magazine, and by extension how this actually operates. These magazines hold 17 rounds, which you can just download to be more realistic, down to 8 or 7 if you're running some ungodly old 1911. And our CO2 tank actually fits right here inside the magazine, which is somewhat awesome. It's a really clever design, so you can have multiple magazines with multiple CO2 tanks for the sake of reloading. I'll show you how this actually works. So this does not have an Airsoft BB loaded. So you can see that the slide catch actually does work, which is pretty critical actually for doing reloading drills. But the way that this actually operates is I'll do it at a bit of an angle so you can see. The CO2 launches the airsoft pellet, and whether there's an airsoft pellet or not, it will drive the slide rearward. So the slide lock obviously would engage if it was loaded, which I'll simulate by holding it down with my thumb. So that is so much fun. That's awesome. And when it's actually loaded, it is pretty reliable. I haven't had any real jams and stuff in this, and I've shot it a lot. One thing is that your slide catch on the magazine is this tiny little piece of plastic right there, which wore off on me on both magazines actually. But all I did is I put a little dab, I disassembled the magazine, put a little dab of super glue on there, let it dry. You'll notice I use that a lot. And then now it works pretty good, and then if it stops working, which I'm sure it will, another little dab of super glue, and that should fix it right up. So it's a really good option for that realistic training, because it is set up in a very realistic way. Now the downside of these magazines is if we compare the magazines side by side, you're like, man, that is pretty much identical to the real thing in form factor, pretty much all the way around. It even has a little lip in the front. The downside here is if you look closely at the side, the CO2 tank sticks out on either side, so it's actually a little thicker than the actual magazine, which means if you have like a Phobos holster for your 1911 mags, guess what? That CO2 tank won't fit in there. Now if you're running like a cloth kangaroo style, like on an LBE or something, that's no problem. It'll just slide right in there. But if you're running, like I said, like a Phobos or a custom Kydex deal, that's going to cause you problems. Which you could easily, if you're running custom Kydex, just have a Kydex one made for this. But again, that's more cost that you're looking into, but the amount of money that you're going to save doing training with this thing is going to be well worth it. So on the whole, I think that this is a decent representation of a 1911 in an airsoft type platform. And I remember I said full metal, and the reason that I say full metal is because it's like pop can metal. You can see I dropped it, and that's what happened to my sight landing on the concrete, if I can get it to focus on it, but it's all mushed, which the metal it's made out of, not steel, the metal that it's made out of is not super duper high quality stuff. It's fairly cheap, but I mean, come on, it's an airsoft gun. It doesn't have to be made out of like 60 RC stainless steel like my buddy the Pero over here, because it's not dealing with anywhere near that much force. You can see it's just barely jingles in the hand. So you're not dealing with a super huge amount of force, and you know, this is not a go to war option type of deal, so we're not worried about that ultimate ruggedness of having super high quality steels. So that pop can metal doesn't bother me. One spot with the pop can metal does kind of bother me, like I said, is in the internal components down in here. They are super soft, so I don't think you could really get away with doing much of a trigger job on it. But other than that, it is super fun just to go out and play with, and for doing like reloading drills and things like that, it definitely serves well. There's that safety deal I told you about. So that's one thing to remember. But I'm going to go ahead and roll in some clips of me doing some reloading drills with my brother, and you'll get a sense of the kind of realistic training that you can do with this airsoft.
Threat.
You missed the slide catch, but that mag went in quick.
Threat. That's what you get, man. That's what you get.
Talk about my mama.